Friend, my favorite Boston Globe columnist, Tom Keane, joins us, and we'll look at all the upcoming races and what we might expect in the new year. I'm Joe Heisler, your host. Tonight, all politics as is our usual want, election 2014 coverage, and as we head into the stretch run towards the November election, lots to talk about, lots to think about. Of course, the latest polls showing the race for governor neck and neck between Republican Charlie Baker and Democrat Martha Coakley. Three independent candidates on the ballot as well, who may or may not have an impact on the final. Many other races down ballot, including Steve Tompkins, who was here earlier, and pleased to have joining me to kind of chew on this as he does every Sunday and Tuesday in the Boston Globe op-ed pages. I'm talking, of course, about Tom Keane, one of their columnists. And Tom, nice to have you.
Pleasure to be here, Joe.
As always, well, where should we start on this?
Why don't we start with the city council pay raise?
Well, I was just thinking about that. As a former city councilor yourself, you know what a tough job that is.
Oh, it's the hardest job in the world. So the city councilors have proposed, or Bill Linehan, who's the president of the city council, has proposed a $25,000 increase.
29%.
29% increase brings them up above $100,000 when $52,000 is something like the median family income in Boston. So they'll be well compensated.
Tough sell?
I think it's a tough sell. I'll tell you what's the real problem. The real problem is that, and this happened with the State Ethics Commission today, city councilors can't vote on their own pay increases. You can vote on a pay increase to take effect on the next election, but you certainly can't vote for your pay now going up. I actually had, when I was a city councilor, this actually came through, and I tried to make an amendment. And I tried to amend the legislation to have it take effect next time. It got defeated. The pay increase went through. I actually just refused to take it. This time around, there's much more scrutiny of this. The pay increase is really quite high, and I have to tell you, this is one of the worst things the city councilors have done to themselves that I've ever seen.
How so?
And the State Ethics Commission is saying flat out, you cannot do this. They have looked at it. They hadn't looked at it back when I was a city councilor. They've looked at it. You cannot do this. And yet they continue to proceed forward trying to do it. It's just beyond the pale in terms of the size of the increase at this point. The fact that they're trying to make a grab for it right now, rather than doing the right thing, which is simply defer it until after the next election. Mm-hmm. That's the way to do it. Then go out and you say, look, I mean, from my point of view, you run for an office, there's a certain salary connected to the office, stick with that salary during your term in office. Now, it's only 2 years. You run again and get reelected, and if the pay's higher, then fine. The pay's higher, the voters decided you were worth it.
And if it is deferred, and it may be that there's ultimately a legal ruling, and of course, if they do choose to go ahead with it as is, of course, Mayor Marty Walsh could always veto it as well, of course.
And he has indicated at this point that he will veto it if they go forward with an immediate pay increase, and he should.
Well, but do you see anything wrong with pay increase in general if it's deferred until January of 2016? It would be.
But no, I don't. I mean, and in fact, the other side of this thing is that what city councilors and quite frankly all politicians need to get into the habit of doing is being willing to vote on pay increase to take effect after the next election, but do it on a fairly routine basis so that somehow you keep pace with whatever the cost of living is. I will say that looking at this particular increase, this is far more than is necessary to keep pace with the cost of living. So on that alone, I mean, there's two problems with this. It's too much. There's an amount that's appropriate, but certainly $25K is too much, and it certainly should not be taking effect right away. Wait until after the next election. Wait until, I guess that would be 2017, right?
Well, let me flip that, because you were a district city councilor, and of course some people think they don't do anything anyway. What do you say to that?
So
how did you?
So it's really a two-edged sword. I mean, the council, I think, does have a lot of value. It on a fairly regular basis, is really unwilling or unable to step up and assert itself. It always plays second fiddle to the mayor. We have what's called a strong mayor, weak city council form of government. Its greatest source of power is the power of the purse, is the power of the budget. But the councilors kind of always get outmaneuvered by the mayor in that particular battle. And so they really don't have much of an impact. As a result, you see councilors kind of devolving down into constituent services people. And the real question, I think, about the city council is whether you really need to have that role at all. Could you, in fact, just have an effective functioning city government so that if people have a problem, they don't need to call up a political connection to get a pothole repaired, but rather just go into City Hall and get it, call up City Hall and have it repaired. I honestly think that much of what the council does at this point could probably be done by a part-time councilors. They actually only meet once a week on Wednesdays.
Wait a minute, this is akin to blasphemy here in the city
well,
of Boston.
I know it is, but we have 13 full-time city councilors, and much of what councilors do, and they will tell you that they're involved in constituent services. I don't know why. I don't know why we politicize things like filling a pothole. We simply should not.
Well, of course, some people say that's the only way it gets done. Now, I won't
and
differ
if that's
with you.
the case, if that's the case, then that is a real flaw with the administration. Absolutely.
And it'd be very interesting to see. Of course, we are planning to do something on this very issue. We'll see how it evolves. Is correct. Want to shift gears a little bit. Let's go back to what we started out talking about. Not you and I, but the elections this fall, and of course,
they're very exciting.
Very
exciting.
The most appropriate phrase that I've heard used is the Battle of the Bland.
Right.
This is after, we became accustomed to
look, part of it
Deval Patrick, if nothing else.
Like him or not, Deval Patrick is an electrifying figure.
He certainly
absolutely
is. And,
fantastic
great
campaigner.
Now, we've got Charlie, too, and Martha, too, both who didn't fare so well in their last, Martha Coakley, she was elected AG in the interim, but everyone remembers her run for the U.S. Senate, and of course everybody remembers Charlie Baker's run for governor last time. What's different this time, do you think? Are they breaking through in some way?
I don't know. I think there's interesting stories there. Martha Coakley probably went through one of the worst public trials I've ever seen happen to a political official. She was mocked in Saturday Night Live, among other venues, for her loss to Scott Brown. And she really took a lot of hits on it. And she kind of toughed it out. I actually have a lot of admiration for the way that she really was able to deal with those hits, set her sights forward, do her job as Attorney General, run for re-election as Attorney General and do quite well, and now come back into this. Now, that doesn't mean she's going to win, but you certainly have to admire the character of the woman for being able to push through this.
Yeah, she's got some moxie.
Right. In terms of Charlie Baker, there's an interesting story, which you actually don't see as Charlie Baker 2. Charlie Baker 2 was last election. You're actually back to Charlie Baker 1. Charlie Baker 1 is the moderate Republican who's pro-choice, pro-gay rights. He's the guy who's really fiscally conservative, socially liberal, the guy who worked for Bill Weld at his administration of finance, the same guy who really did turn around Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. And then when he ran against Deval Patrick, for some reason he turned into, the evil Charlie Baker, the bad Charlie Baker, who was sour and negative and criticizing. And he got his hat handed to him as a result. Now what we do is, I guess what we have is, Charlie Baker 1.2. He's back to the original Charlie Baker, and
which is the real one.
And I think the real one is not the guy we saw last election. I think the real one is the guy who has a very long career in both government and business. And that's the guy we now see running.
And let me ask you about this, because of course they've been at pains to kind of roll out the kinder, gentler Charlie Baker. Not only that, campaigning in the city of Boston, campaigning in the community of color, going to marching in all the parades, and
he's certainly getting better political advice this time around.
Well, is that sticking? I think it is. Is that working?
Yes, I think it is. I think if you look at the polls, the tracking polls appear to be saying that Charlie Baker is catching up. He was behind by 10, 15 points The latest poll out of the Globe, I think just a few days ago, showed him 2 points ahead. Now that's within the margin of error, so it certainly doesn't tell you what's going to happen. But it really does suggest that there's a dynamic in this that's helping him. Now, having said that, Charlie Baker is certainly capable of messing up his own campaign, and I think we saw that earlier this week when he addressed a Fox TV reporter as sweetheart, which is one of these incredibly boneheaded things. I mean, he and I are about the same age. I don't do that. I don't know why he does it. And it's like, I mean, I don't do it to people, to waitresses. I don't do it to anybody. I mean, it's kind of common sense. And I don't know what culture he came out of that causes him to say something like that. But it was, it may be one of those things that simply dies of its own accord. And it does even seem to be dying at this point. Although I'm sure we're going to see a few ads that have it.
I'm sure we will.
But does it say anything substantive about the guy? No, it really doesn't. It's just one of those political hits. I mean, the truth is...
Gaffe.
Yeah, it's a classic gaffe. It's quite frankly, a lot of male politicians continue to have sort of those almost closet sexist things that they do, and they don't even know they're doing them.
Right.
Whether it's that instead of shaking the hands of a female politician, they'll go up and give her a hug. Well, they won't do that with a guy, and so there's definitely different standards of behavior that you see out of men who really haven't figured out sometimes how to deal with women in sort of ordinary business.
Okay. Now let's go to Martha
situations.
Coakley, because she's a little odd too when it comes, or awkward, I should say. And leaving aside whether she knew who, which Red Sox player was this or that, which of course she was, made fun of relentlessly during the Senate campaign. But, she's not necessarily a warm and fuzzy type. And of course, being a woman, there's some pressure on her from the other side too. You can't be seen as this soft on any issue, Does she kind of get squeezed in between? How's she doing? It's
well, I mean, if the polls would suggest she's falling a little bit behind, but the truth is it's a neck-and-neck race. I think it's anyone's over the next number of weeks. I think the problem that Martha Coakley has is that she's not the classic hail fellow well met. She is not a backslapper. And in politics these days, people try to present themselves in that way, as just being gregarious and so, reaching out and charismatic. She has a lot of strengths. Those aren't her strengths. And she seems to be put in this box where she's trying to become the more charismatic, gregarious person, and she's very uncomfortable in that role. Maybe that's what politics demands of her, and of anybody these days, but it's very uncomfortable, so it doesn't work really well for someone who's not that way. Baker's a little bit more comfortable in that.
Yet, despite the fact, of course, we had a whole history of Republican governors, whole series from Weld on through up to Romney. Of late, Democrats have had their way across the board, winning every elective office, you name it. They're a handful in the state legislature, and that's it.
That's right.
Notwithstanding whatever Charlie Baker does, is this state gone so blue that it almost doesn't matter who the Democratic candidate is?
I think it's exactly the opposite. So if this state were simply voting on the basis of party label, that we vote for Democrats and we don't vote for Republicans, Charlie Baker would be at about 30 to 35% in the polls. The reason that a Republican is actually attractive at this point to blue Democratic voters, or certainly left of center independent voters, is because there is that monopoly. And one of Baker's strongest arguments, quite frankly, is that you need someone guarding the chicken coop, that someone has to be there. You can't have everyone all the same party. And you look at things like the probation department scandal. This is the kind of stuff where you really can make an effective argument that having someone from the other party actually is a good check on everybody else. The voters of this state have made it quite clear that they're not going to elect Republican legislators, and they're not going to elect most Republican, they're not going to elect Republican members of Congress, or even for some of the lower level constitutional positions. But I think at the governor's level, that's what you saw with, with Baker, with Weld rather, that's what you saw with Romney, that's what you saw with Cellucci, that people do like having someone else in charge. And that's helping him here.
Well, clearly, and if the polls are to be believed, and I think they're certainly within the margin of error.
Yeah.
It's how important do these debates become that are coming up? How important are they to?
So, of course,
or will it be based on who can flood the airwaves with the most negative ads from independent expenditure committees, which of course they know nothing about.
Right. So although I will say I've actually liked a lot of the ads from the candidates at this point. I think they've been pretty good. But the thing about debates, the critical thing about debates, not a lot of people will watch the debates. So the people watching the debates and probably already have their minds made up. So it's not that that's going to have a significant impact in a direct sense that you watch it and you say, yeah, I really like that answer by Charlie, or I really like that answer by Martha. What happens with debates is the way they end up getting reported out. And it's the gaffe, it's the mistake that you make in a debate that can actually kill you, and that's when the debates are significant. So the key thing for both of those candidates in there is to be very well prepped, to be able to answer the questions, to not be evasive, and to not mess up.
And don't make any mistakes.
Don't make any mistakes. So you have to play a very
conservative strategy. Does that give an advantage
strategy
to one or the other? Or?
I don't know. It's one of the things that has surprised me is the degree to which
you've got the prosecutor and you've got the chief executive officer.
I don't think that that's going to matter that much. I just think it's going to be the statement that one makes that suddenly becomes the rallying cry for a whole bunch of people that really ends up hurting you. And so as a consequence, you go into debates like this and you want to play it safe. That's the real strategy. Don't be, neither one of them should be jerks. Don't be attacking aggressively the other person. Try to present yourself in a positive light, and don't say anything controversial.
And do women decide what happens in this race? It's kind of being portrayed that way, that that they will tell a tale. And of course, they vote in greater numbers, or historically have, than men have.
Yeah. So or you can say, do men, men who favor Charlie, men right now according to polls, appear to favor Charlie Baker by significantly greater margins than they do Martha Coakley. So what is fair to say is that there's definitely a gender gap here. Mm-hmm. And because the polls also show that Martha Coakley has the preponderance of the votes there. Right. But the polls also show that there's a lot of potential movement there. Martha Coakley very well may be able to appeal to men. It does seem that the campaign strategy at this point is trying to hold her female base. Quite clearly, Charlie is trying to go after that female base, and that's he's trying to go after the female base, he's trying to go after the Democratic base.
Well, of course, and we'll be following the race as it evolves, and of course, on election night, we'll be providing live coverage and all the results from that race, as well as the races down ballot, constitutional races, and county races. We've got just a couple minutes left. I've got to ask you about these other things because you're the one guy that's never afraid to take on these sacred cows in your columns. All
right, tell me.
Take your pick. Olympics. What?
What a boneheaded idea.
Huh? No
way.
Doesn't fly?
Doesn't fly. And seriously, I think that if somehow we are unlucky enough to be picked for it, we will just have a disastrous legacy here. It'll be one that bankrupts us. I do not think that Boston is a city that needs to have the Olympics to make it a success.
Casino gambling.
So
what happens?
What happens? Oh, I think that the voters do not defeat casino gambling.
So it remains.
I believe that it will remain, and I think that the reason for that is that probably the opposition to it was sort of at a peak when you were seeing some of the scandal or the potential conflicts of interest within the Gambling Commission itself, when decisions hadn't been made. At this point, decisions have been made, and now what you have is kind of a dynamic where everyone knows where the casinos are going to be. The people where the casinos are located seem to be very enthusiastic about them, so they're going to be very strongly in favor of keeping the law as it is. Everyone else is going to be, well, it's not in my backyard, so I guess I'm okay.
And I want to ask you, very quickly, did Mayor Marty Walsh drop the ball by refusing to negotiate with Steve Wynn?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was a big mistake.
Well, and we'll hear more about gas tax.
Oh, I think, so the problem with the gas tax is this automatic increase, which is that, it's one thing, in fact, it's fine and was overdue to actually increase it by 3 cents from 21 to 24 cents. Not a dime, as Martha Coakley would have you believe, but 21 to 24 cents. And that didn't even keep up with the pace of inflation, but now what the law has is a provision in it that it automatically increases every single year based on the consumer price index. That, to my mind, is kind of taxation without representation. The whole idea behind taxation is that politicians have to answer for tax increases and decreases. They have to face the voters. And this
So
is
indexing it,
indexing, I think, is a huge mistake.
maybe the Achilles heel of it.
Well, and that's what this, and by the way, this referendum only stops the indexation. It doesn't roll back the increase. So I think that this referendum should pass.
Well, and again, Tom Keane is a regular columnist in the Boston Globe now. His column appears every Sunday and Tuesday on the op-ed pages. Must reading, especially if you want to catch the latest ideas put forth on a number of controversial topics. And as always, love having you come in and share some of those with us. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I've got a whole list of other things to ask you, so you'll have to.
I'll be back.
Return visit. Beautiful.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for coming and joining me. Again, my thanks to Steve Tompkins as well, the Suffolk County Sheriff, who was here earlier, and of course to the entire staff and crew here at the Boston Neighborhood Network. I'm Joe Heisler. I want to thank you for watching. We'll be back next week at the same time. Until then, for the entire staff and crew, have a pleasant evening. Good night.